Welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through today's topic, because it completely reshapes how we view the highest office in the United States. We usually think of the succession of presidential power as this highly predictable, deeply scheduled, smoothly choreographed event, right? Well, actually, scratch that. History tells us a wildly different story. Today, we're looking at the ultimate shocks to the system.
So what happens when the chair of the leader of the free world suddenly, and I mean literally without warning, becomes empty? It's a pretty provocative question. We're going to dive straight into the sheer chaos, the constitutional panic, and the unprecedented nature of the 9 historical transitions where a vice president was just suddenly thrust into the presidency. As you'll see, each of these transitions features incredibly unique circumstances that fundamentally change the course of history.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for exploring these shifts. 1. The unexpected burden of power. 2. Crises and party splits. 3. Unusual methods of inauguration. 4. Tragedies and triumphs of nations. And finally, 5. An unprecedented double resignation.
All right, before we get into the specific circumstances, let's just establish the landscape here. This massive shock to the system has occurred exactly 9 times, and you can probably spot a grim pattern right away. Natural deaths and tragic assassinations completely dominate the reasons for these sudden vacancies, with one very notable exception at the bottom with a resignation. Think about it. Each of these men woke up one morning expecting to just be the backup and went to sleep carrying the weight of the entire nation on their shoulders.
Section 1. The unexpected burden of power, the first tests of succession.
Just 31 days. That is all the time William Henry Harrison spent in office back in 1841 before he passed away. And this handed Vice President John Tyler the presidency in a completely unprecedented scenario. Up until this point, the nation had no practical playbook for this. People were wondering, is Tyler the actual president or just the acting president? By forcefully claiming the full title and powers of the presidency, Tyler set a super vital precedent. But, as you might guess, his incredibly unique circumstances immediately led to intense friction.
And man, that friction earned him a rather harsh nickname. His political critics saddled him with the title, His Accidency. They were basically mocking the reality that sheer chance, rather than a direct presidential election, placed him in power. But the tension wasn't just with his political opponents. Tyler actively clashed with his own Whig party. He was vetoing bills proposed by Whig leaders in Congress, pushing policies that totally broke with the party line. It escalated so much that the Whigs actually expelled their own sitting president from the party altogether.
Less than a decade later, boom, another shock. Millard Fillmore ascended in 1850 following Zachary Taylor's sudden death from a mysterious illness. And this brilliantly illustrates how accidental presidencies often coincide with massive shifts in the political landscape. See, Fillmore was a member of the Whig Party, but the party was fracturing over deep issues like slavery. So shortly after his term ended in 1853, the Whigs essentially disbanded. Because of this, Fillmore holds a really unique place in history. He is the absolute last U.S. president who is neither a Democrat nor a Republican. His ascension effectively marked the end of an era and the beginning of the two-party dominance we still recognize today.
Moving on to Section 2. Crises and party splits, navigating the aftermath. Now, there is perhaps no heavier burden in American history than the one dropped on Andrew Johnson in 1865. The Civil War had just ended, the country was fundamentally shattered, and the horrific assassination of Abraham Lincoln left the nation in profound mourning. Johnson, who was a Democrat from Tennessee, added to Lincoln's ticket for unity, was suddenly tasked with the monumental and incredibly sensitive reconstruction of the former Confederate states. Talk about a tall order. Naturally, the circumstances of Johnson's presidency put him immediately at odds with Congress. He faced severe criticism from Republicans who felt he was being way too lenient toward the former Confederacy. Plus, he vetoed critical legislation designed to protect the rights of newly freed Black Americans. The crisis really boiled over when Johnson fired his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, without getting the required congressional approval. This final action triggered a totally unprecedented response. The House of Representatives voted to impeach him. Johnson became the first president ever to be impeached, and he narrowly escaped conviction and removal from office by a single solitary vote. But hey, not all unexpected presidencies end in disaster or impeachment. Take Chester A. Arthur, who took over following the tragic assassination of James Garfield in 1881. Arthur actually surprised a lot of people. He championed the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, which awarded government jobs based on merit rather than corrupt political loyalty, a real game changer at the time. His administration was so surprisingly effective that he even managed to win over one of the harshest political satirists of the era, Mark Twain, who offered up a glowing quote about his time in office. It just goes to show how wildly unpredictable these transitions can be.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is Section 3, Unusual Methods of Inauguration, Midnight Lamps to Television Screens.
You've got to look at this stark contrast. It's fascinating. When Warren G. Harding died suddenly in 1923, Calvin Coolidge was visiting his family in rural Vermont. There was literally no electricity. So in the middle of the night, illuminated only by a kerosene lamp, Coolidge took the oath of office. And because there was no Chief Justice around, the oath was administered by his own father, who just happened to be a notary public. Compare that incredibly intimate, almost archaic scene to Harry S. Truman. While Truman initially ascended after FDR's death, when he won his own elected second term in 1948, his inauguration became the very first one to be broadcast on television. An estimated 10 million viewers watched it live. From a kerosene lamp in a dark farmhouse to the glowing screens of 10 million televisions, these two extremes beautifully capture how radically the circumstances of presidential ascensions can differ.
Let's jump to Section 4, Tragedies and Triumphs of Nations, Shaping Global and Domestic Policy.
Okay, let's trace the timeline of Theodore Roosevelt. He ascends in 1901 after McKinley's tragic death. Just a few years later, the Russo-Japanese War breaks out, seriously threatening global stability in the Pacific. Now, instead of taking a back seat, Roosevelt actively intervenes. In August 1905, he invites delegates to New Hampshire and presides over intense peace talks for 30 days, successfully brokering the Treaty of Portsmouth. As a direct result, in 1906, the man who became president completely by chance became the very first U.S. president to win a Nobel Peace Prize. He essentially took an accidental mandate and turned it into global peacemaking.
We see a similarly aggressive domestic push with Lyndon B. Johnson. LBJ assumed the presidency in 1963 during the profound national trauma of John F. Kennedy's assassination. But Johnson immediately went to work. He channeled the nation's immense grief into legislative momentum, rapidly launching his Great Society platform. He passed landmark legislation including Medicare and sweeping anti-poverty laws, fundamentally altering the social safety net of the United States.
And wow, did the public respond to this decisively. When LBJ ran for his own term in 1964 against Barry Goldwater, he didn't just win. He won by a record-breaking margin of 15 million votes. To put that into perspective, at the time, that was the widest margin of any U.S. presidential election. That massive number proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Johnson had entirely shed the accidental label and earned a massive, undeniable mandate from the American people.
And that brings us to Section 5, an unprecedented double resignation, the ultimate constitutional stress test.
Let's move to this timeline and see how this builds, because it is a dizzying domino effect. In 1973, Vice President Spiro Agnew resigns due to a corruption scandal. To fill the sudden vacancy, President Richard Nixon appoints Republican Congressman Gerald Ford as the new VP. But Ford's time as the backup? Incredibly short-lived. Just 1 year later, in 1974, the Watergate scandal totally engulfs the White House, and Richard Nixon resigns the presidency. Instantly, Gerald Ford steps in to take his place in the Oval Office.
Think about how wild this is. Gerald Ford remains, to this day, the only person to ever serve as the United States president without winning a general election as either the presidential or the vice presidential candidate. He was appointed to one vacant role and then a year later ascended to the next vacant role. It completely cements our central theme today. While we normally view the presidency through the lens of structured, predictable elections, the actual path to the highest office in the land is often paved with bizarre exceptions and totally unprecedented circumstances. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. Next time you head to the ballot box to vote for a president, ask yourself, are we actually just choosing the person at the top of the ticket? Or should we be paying much closer attention to the unexpected shadow standing right behind them? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. I hope this look into history helped illuminate the unpredictable human element behind these monumental shifts in power. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time.